By the time the sun slipped low enough to turn the land copper red, Caleb Rowan had already decided that if anything else went wrong that day, he would let it. The ranch had taken everything from him anyway. He stood near the corral, one hand resting on the splintered fence rail, listening to the dry wind scrape across the earth. The sound never stopped anymore. It whispered through the grassless fields, rattled the empty troughs, and slid through the gaps in the barn boards, like it was searching for something that no longer lived there. Caleb had learned not to answer it. The well had run dry months ago. The cattle were gone, sold one by one, until the pens echoed when he walked past them. The house still stood, but it felt hollow, like a shell left behind after something crawled out and never came back. Only the horse remained. She stood quietly inside the corral, head lowered, ribs faintly visible beneath her coat. She was small, stubborn, and loyal, much like the man who fed her the last of the grain that morning. Caleb had told himself she was his final option. When the land finally gave up completely, he would saddle her, ride east, and disappear into whatever waited beyond the dust. That was the plan. It was a thin one, but it was his. Then he saw movement near the fence line. At first he thought it was heat playing tricks on his eyes. The land did that sometimes. But then one shape stumbled, caught itself, and leaned heavily into another. Two figures emerged from the fading light, moving slowly, like every step hurt. Caleb's first instinct was to turn away. People brought trouble, questions, expectations. He had learned that lesson the hard way. He took a step back, already preparing the lie he would tell himself, that he hadn't seen them clearly, that they would find help elsewhere. But they didn't stop walking. They didn't wave or shout. They just kept coming, driven by something deeper than hope. When they reached the fence, Caleb could see they were young women. Sisters, by the way, one stayed upright only to support the other. The older one's face was calm but tight with strain. The younger's steps dragged. Dark stains marked her torn clothing. "Please," the older sister said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "We don't need much." Caleb didn't answer right away. He felt the weight of the horse behind him, the invisible weight of his own future pressing against his chest. He thought of the empty house, the dry well, the long nights where the silence felt louder than any storm. He asked no questions. He didn't ask where they came from, or why they were hurt, or who might be following them. Deep down, he already knew the answers would only make things worse. He walked to the corral, unlatched the gate, and led the horse forward. The older sister's breath caught when she realized what he was doing. "Sir," she said, shaking her head. "We can't." "You can," Caleb said, finally finding his voice. It sounded rough, unused. "You need her more than I do." He helped lift the injured sister into the saddle. She was lighter than she should have been. That bothered him more than he expected. The older sister took the reins with careful hands, her eyes shining with something close to disbelief. "You don't even know our names," she said. Caleb shrugged. Names don't change what's right. For a moment, none of them moved. The sun dipped lower, stretching their shadows across the cracked earth. Caleb felt a strange calm settle over him, mixed with a quiet fear he couldn't explain. Giving away the horse felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing how far the fall would be. The older sister met his eyes. "My name is Ayana," she said. "This is Luma." Caleb nodded once, committing the names to memory without knowing why. "Take the East Trail," he said. "It's rough, but it'll keep you out of sight." Ayana hesitated, then reached out and pressed something small into his hand. A simple woven cord, warm from her skin. "For your kindness," she said. He closed his fingers around it as they turned away. The horse carried them slowly into the land, her hooves stirring dust that glowed in the dying light. Caleb watched until the shapes blurred into the horizon and vanished. Only then did the silence return. He stood alone again, The corral empty, the future gone. Strangely, he didn't feel regret. What he felt instead was the quiet certainty that something had shifted, that the land had finally answered him, not with mercy, but with change. As night settled in, Caleb Rowan went inside his house knowing one truth he couldn't escape. That single, quiet choice had ended the life he knew. Caleb Rowan woke before the sun, not because he meant to, but because the air felt wrong. The ranch was too quiet. Even the wind had paused, like it was holding its breath. He sat up in bed, listening. At first there was nothing, just the soft creak of the house settling, the faint sound of his own breathing. Then he heard it. A low vibration under the silence. Not thunder, not cattle. Hooves. Caleb swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. His boots were still by the door. He pulled them on without haste, though his hands had started to shake. He told himself it could be ranchers passing through. He told himself it could be anything except what his gut already knew. When he stepped outside, dawn was just beginning to break. The sky was pale and wide, and the land stretched out the same way it always had. Empty, dry, unforgiving. Except it wasn't empty anymore. Figures moved at the edge of the property. Dozens of them. Horses lined the low ridge to the east, their silhouettes sharp against the rising light. More appeared from the south and west, calm and organized, spreading out without a sound. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. Caleb's heart pounded once, hard, then slowed. He understood something in that moment that surprised him. Whatever this was, it wasn't chaos. It was intention. He stepped forward, away from the house, making himself visible. Hiding would only make things worse. The riders closed in, stopping at a careful distance. They were men and women, faces serious, eyes alert. None of them raised their voices. None of them looked angry. That, more than anything, unsettled him. Then one rider moved ahead of the others. The man was older, his posture straight despite the years etched into his face. His hair was streaked with gray, tied back neatly. He studied Caleb with steady eyes, the kind that missed nothing. Caleb waited. He didn't speak. He had a sudden feeling that words, if used poorly, could tip the balance of something he didn't fully understand. "You are Caleb Rowan," the man said. It wasn't a question. Caleb nodded. "I am." The man inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, not submission. "I am Tashunka Gray Elk." The name carried weight. Caleb felt it without knowing why. "You helped 2 young women yesterday," the chief continued. "You gave them your horse." Caleb's throat tightened. For a brief second he thought of the corral standing empty behind him. He thought of the east trail, of dust rising in the dying light. "Yes," he said. "I did." Silence stretched between them. The riders waited, patient as stone. Caleb braced himself. He expected anger, accusation, some demand he couldn't meet. Instead, the chief spoke again, his voice lower now. "Those women are my daughters." Caleb looked up sharply. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "They were hurt," he said. "They needed help." "They needed to live," the chief replied. "And because of you, they do." A murmur passed through the riders, soft but unmistakable. Respect, gratitude. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief washed through him, quick and unexpected. But it didn't last. The chief's expression did not soften. "You must listen carefully now," he said, "because what you did cannot be undone." Caleb straightened. "I'm listening." "My daughters were seen," the chief said. "They saw something powerful men do not want known. When you helped them, you placed yourself between those men and silence." The words settled heavy in the morning air. Caleb felt a chill despite the rising sun. "I didn't see anything," he said. "I don't know anything." The chief shook his head slowly. "It will not matter to them." One of the riders shifted, scanning the horizon, Another dismounted and walked the perimeter of the ranch, eyes sharp, movements practiced. They remove problems, the chief went on. Quietly, permanently. Anyone who helps a witness becomes one. Caleb thought of the empty land around him, of how exposed the ranch really was. He had believed isolation meant safety. Now he understood how wrong that was. So what happens now? He asked. The chief met his gaze. You cannot stay here. Caleb's jaw tightened. This is my land. For now, the chief said gently, but not for long, and not safely. Caleb looked back at the house, at the place where he had watched everything slip away piece by piece. Leaving it felt like another loss stacked on too many others. You have a choice, the chief continued. You can ride with us and live, or you can stay and trust men who do not value life. The sun broke fully over the horizon, flooding the ranch with light. Caleb felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him, heavy but clear. He had given away his last horse without knowing why. Now he understood. He turned back to the chief. I'll go with you. The chief nodded once. Then come. Daylight is not on our side. As Caleb walked toward the riders, he felt the final thread tying him to the ranch pull tight and snap. The life he had known was already behind him, and ahead lay something dangerous, unavoidable, and set in motion by a single act of quiet kindness. The canyon narrowed as they rode deeper, the walls rising on both sides until the open sky became a thin blue line overhead. By the time the horses slowed, evening had settled in, and the air carried the steady warmth of stone that had held the sun all day. Fires flickered ahead, small and controlled, their light carefully shielded from the open land beyond. Caleb dismounted in silence. His legs felt stiff, his thoughts heavier than his body. This place was nothing like his ranch. It was alive. People moved with purpose, speaking in low voices, tending fires, checking the canyon paths. No one wasted motion. No one looked lost. Ayana approached first. She looked stronger now, her posture straighter, though fatigue still showed in her eyes. You made it, she said quietly. Luma sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, her injury cleaned and bound. When she saw Caleb, she gave a small nod. It wasn't gratitude spoken aloud, but it carried weight. Chief Tashunka Gray Elk led Caleb toward the largest fire, where several elders sat. They watched him carefully, not with suspicion, but with the calm attention of people deciding something important. You are safe here for the night, the chief said. But you deserve to know why you were brought? Caleb lowered himself onto a flat stone near the fire. The heat pressed against his face, and for a moment, he felt more tired than he ever had in his life. Ayana spoke first. We were traveling near the river 2 days ago, she said. We weren't supposed to be there, but the water had drawn us in. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of her blanket. The fire crackled softly between her words. We heard voices, she continued. Men speaking as if they owned the land already. Luma's voice followed, quieter but clear. They talked about papers, about creating trouble so others would be blamed, about moving people off the land without being seen as the cause. Caleb's stomach tightened. He leaned forward slightly, listening. They did not see us at first, Ayana said. But when they did, they chased us. We ran. We didn't stop until we collapsed near your fence. The canyon seemed to close in around them as the truth settled. Caleb thought of the dust rising at dawn, of the chief's warning. This was bigger than survival. This was a plan designed to erase people without noise. An elder across the fire spoke. These men work with officials who hide behind clean words. They promise progress while taking what is not theirs. Caleb swallowed. Why not go to the authorities? He asked. If you have proof. We tried, the chief said calmly. Those doors are closed to us. That was when the emotional weight shifted. Caleb stared into the fire, and suddenly he wasn't in the canyon anymore. He was standing on his ranch months earlier, arguing with a banker who smiled while explaining why the land would be taken piece by piece. No shouting, no threats, just signatures and polite words that left nothing behind but loss. The memory hit him harder than he expected. "They speak softly," Caleb said, his voice tight. "And they act like they're helping. That's how they do it." The elders watched him closely now. Caleb stood, pacing a few steps before stopping himself, his hands curled into fists. "I thought losing my land was just bad luck. Weather, markets, bad timing." He shook his head. But it was people. People who already decided who mattered. Silence followed, heavy and shared. The chief rose slowly. "Now you understand why we must be careful." Caleb met his eyes. "You're not just protecting yourselves," he said. "You're protecting the truth." "Yes," the chief replied. "And now so are you." The words landed like a weight. Caleb felt the pull of a moral line he couldn't ignore. He could still walk away. He could try to disappear, blend into some distant town, pretend he'd never heard any of this. But he thought of the empty corral, of the quiet choice he'd already made without knowing the cost. "What do you need from me?" Caleb asked. The chief studied him for a long moment. "Nothing yet," he said. "Only that you stay, listen, and decide who you are when danger arrives." As night deepened, the fires burned lower. The canyon held its breath. Caleb lay awake later, staring up at the narrow strip of stars. He realized then that kindness had led him here, but choice would decide what happened next. And for the first time in a long while, he understood that doing the right thing might cost him everything he had left, and he wasn't sure he was willing to walk away anymore. The warning came just after midday, carried by a rider who pushed his horse hard through the narrow pass. "They've found the outer trail," he said, breath tight but controlled. "They're moving fast." The camp changed instantly. Fires were covered. Children were guided deeper into the canyon. The calm that had filled the place since Caleb's arrival didn't vanish, but it hardened into focus. Everyone knew their role. Caleb stood near the canyon wall, watching warriors take positions along the narrow approach. The land here forced movement into a single path. High rock walls, loose ground, no easy way through. Chief Tashunka Gray Elk moved beside him. "This is where they will try to push," he said. "They believe force and fear solve all things." Caleb nodded, though his chest felt tight. He had never been part of anything like this. Back on his ranch, danger came slowly. Dry seasons, bad deals, quiet losses. This was different. This was close. He checked the simple rifle he'd been handed. His hands were steady, which surprised him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't looking for payback. He kept thinking of Ayana helping her sister walk, of elders sitting by the fire, of people who trusted him without reason. That was why he stayed. Dust appeared at the far end of the canyon. Shapes followed. Horses, men riding in a tight line, confident, careless in their certainty. At the front rode a man with neat clothes and an easy posture, as if this were a meeting he expected to control. Victor Hale. Caleb had heard the name whispered earlier. A man who smiled when he spoke. A man who liked to sound reasonable. Hale raised a hand, signaling his group to slow. His voice carried down the canyon, calm and practiced. "We don't want trouble," he called. "We're only here to talk." No one answered. The silence irritated him. "You're protecting people who don't understand how the world works," Hale continued. "Step aside and everyone goes home." The chief stepped forward just enough to be seen. "You are not welcome here." Hale smiled. "That's unfortunate." The moment stretched, then movement broke it. Men tried to press forward, thinking numbers would carry them through. They were wrong. The canyon worked against them. Loose stone shifted under hooves. Carefully placed obstacles slowed their advance. The defenders moved with discipline, forcing the pursuers back again and again without chaos. Caleb stayed low, heart pounding, aware of every sound. He wasn't thinking about himself. He was watching the edges, where someone might slip through. When one did, he reacted without hesitation, blocking the path, forcing the man to retreat. Time blurred. Dust filled the air. Voices echoed off stone. Then something changed. Ayanna appeared beside Caleb, holding a small leather bundle tight against her chest. "They're trying to reach this," she said. "What is it?" he asked. "Records," she replied. "Written proof. Names. Agreements." Caleb felt the weight of her words. This was the real target. Not people, not land. Paper that could speak when others tried to stay silent. A sudden push from the far side drew attention away. Hale shouted orders, frustration creeping into his voice. He wasn't smiling anymore. In the confusion, one of the pursuers dropped a satchel. It split open against the rocks. Papers spilled out, marked and stamped. An elder hurried forward, gathering them quickly. The truth was no longer hidden. Seeing the documents change hands, Hale's calm broke. "You don't understand what you're holding," he snapped. "That won't protect you." The chief's voice answered, steady and loud enough for all to hear. "It already has." The defenders pressed once more, firm and united. The canyon gave no ground. The pursuers fell back, realizing too late that control had slipped away. When the dust finally settled, Hale and his men withdrew, their confidence gone, replaced by urgency. They hadn't won. They hadn't erased anything. Caleb leaned against the canyon wall, breathing hard. His arms ached. His thoughts raced. He looked at his hands and realized they were shaking now, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. The chief approached him. "You could have stayed back," he said. Caleb shook his head. "If I did, I wouldn't be able to live with myself." The chief studied him, then nodded once. That is how family speaks. As the camp regrouped, the papers were secured, guarded more carefully than any weapon. Caleb understood then that the fight wasn't over. It had only changed shape. And he knew something else, too. There was no going back to the quiet life he once knew. Whatever waited ahead, he had already chosen his side. Morning came thin and cold in the high mountain pass. Caleb moved carefully along the narrow trail, the land dropping away sharply on both sides. The air felt cleaner up here, but heavier too. Like every breath carried consequence. Ahead of him, Chief Tashunka Gray Elk walked with steady purpose, the leather satchel secured across his chest. Inside it were the papers, records that had survived fear, pursuit, and silence. Behind them, the canyon camp was already far away. They traveled light and quiet. No fires, no unnecessary words. The danger had not vanished with the retreat of their pursuers. It had only shifted direction. Powerful men did not accept loss easily, especially when truth slipped from their hands. Caleb thought about his ranch as they walked. The broken fence, the empty corral, the house that would soon belong to dust and wind. He felt the loss clearly now, without denial. It hurt, but it didn't hollow him the way he expected, because something else had filled that space. By midday, they reached the agreed meeting point. A narrow clearing opened between ridges, hidden from open view, but easy enough to reach if you knew where to look. A lone rider waited there. He dismounted as they approached, hands visible, posture careful. He wore a simple coat, his badge catching the light only when he turned slightly. "My name is Ethan Crowley," he said, "Federal Marshal." The chief studied him. "You came alone?" Crowley nodded. "I was told that would matter." Caleb watched closely. He had learned how polite words could hide intent. But there was something different here. Tired eyes, maybe, or the way Crowley looked at the land like it still meant something. The satchel was handed over without ceremony. Crowley opened it slowly, scanning the papers. His jaw tightened as he read. "This is enough," he said finally. More than enough. Caleb let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. What happens now? He asked. Crowley looked up. Now the truth moves faster than money. Warrants will follow. So will arrests. He paused. But not everyone involved will face consequences right away. The chief nodded, unsurprised. That is often the way. Crowley turned to Caleb. Your ranch is exposed. Once this becomes public, staying there would be unsafe. Caleb gave a small, tired smile. It already is. They parted shortly after. The marshal rode east. Caleb and the chief turned back toward the mountains, toward the people waiting for them. When they reached the new settlement days later, the welcome was quiet, but full. No speeches, no celebration, just hands on shoulders. Food passed without asking. Space made beside the fire. Ayana approached him near dusk. You won't be alone here, she said. I know, Caleb replied, and for the first time in years, he meant it. The decision was made without ceremony. Caleb Rowan was accepted as family, not because he had fought, not because he had lost something, but because he had chosen to stand when walking away would have been easier. Later, as night settled over the mountains, Caleb stood at the edge of the camp and looked out across the dark land. Somewhere far behind him, his ranch sat empty. It would fade, like many things had before it. But the silence inside him was gone. He understood now that belonging wasn't about land or ownership. It was about people who saw you, trusted you, and asked you to stay. Caleb turned back toward the fire, toward voices and warmth, toward a future that no longer felt borrowed. And as the flames flickered and the night deepened, one truth settled in his chest, steady and certain. Some choices cost you everything you had and give you something far greater in return.